Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
Today's case is very geographically close to home for me and my family, most specifically my parents. And I heard about this case very recently in the news, and I immediately called my parents and asked about it, and they had never heard of it. So it's kind of the perfect case for the name of our show today. But before we dive into it, Kelly, what's your question for us today?
Okay, so my question for you is, what is your favorite true crime case that you will never stop looking into? And it can be a past episode.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Um, I think one that I think about the most and have conversations about the most is JonBenet Ramsey.
Ooh, yeah, that's a
There,
good one.
there's just so many weird things in that case.
That
Um,
case is so bizarre.
and that book that you loaned me, We Have Your Daughter, is very interesting and changed my view on a lot of things.
The book is very. I used to be. I used to think one thing, and then I read that book, and it changed my mind completely.
Yeah, I was very, very torn between whether it could have been somebody in the home or if it could have been an intruder. And I didn't like either one of them. I didn't feel confident in either one of them. And after reading that book, I'm very one-sided now.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
What about you?
Oh, for me, it's another one that was a while ago. But I will never stop reading books about, or articles, or listening to things about Elizabeth Short, or better known as the Black Dahlia case.
I kind of figured that was going to be your answer.
Yeah, I can't let it go. Because it's another one where it's like there's so much weird stuff.
Exactly. And there's just so much unknown.
There's a lot of question marks. I've got a book on my shelf right now called The Black Dahlia Avenger that came out a few, I think, years ago now. And I'm just going to read it because I just take in everything from that case. It's fascinating to me that there are so many, well, it could be this, well, it could be that. That fascinates me.
Well, that is a very good intro question for this case because this case has a lot of that. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot that's unknown, and it baffles me because I had never heard of it. My parents have never heard of it. And unfortunately, this might be a bit of a shorter episode today because of all of that, all of the unknown. And I was really worried I would struggle to make it even just close to a normal length episode. Because if you all have listened to us before, you know that we can talk. And our episodes are very easily hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'm sure we're not even going to come close to that for this episode. Luckily, I found a pretty detailed article. This episode takes place in 1979. Okay. So I found an archived article that gave me most of my information. But what's kind of disappointing with all of that is all of the current articles is basically focusing on a recent increase in the reward money in this case. As I mentioned, this case takes place in 1979, and up until basically last week, the reward for any information leading to an arrest in this case was $1,000.
Okay.
And somebody just increased that to 10,000.
Okay, so
and that's why it hit the news again.
Okay, so recently they've increased that reward
within the last week, and that's how I heard about this case, just reading the news.
Right.
But unfortunately, all of the current articles give very, very, very little information about the crime. They're more so talking about the reward.
Okay.
And that's a big reason I wanted to cover this case, is because I think we need a little bit of information about the crime. If they're increasing the reward to get public's help, people need to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So today we are going to be talking about the murders of two 17-year-old girls,
Oh.
Susan Ovington and Eyvonne Bender from Morton Grove, Illinois. And based on our analytics, I know we have listeners in Morton Grove and surrounding suburbs. And the largest majority of our listeners are within the age range of 45 to 59, which puts you just slightly younger than Susan and Eyvonne would be if they were alive today. So I'm hoping that this might just reach your ears. And if you knew Susan or Eyvonne, we would love to hear from you and provide any details that I could have missed. Or if you just can tell us more about Susan and Eyvonne's personalities. I would really love to know more about who they were.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, I'm surprised with this case so specifically because this is the same area my parents grew up in. My dad literally grew up less than 3 miles away from where this happened.
Wow.
They went to schools that were very, very close to Susan and Eyvonne. They didn't go to the same high school, but being only 3 miles away, they weren't far. And in the last week or so, I've called them quite a bit to kind of ask questions and talk about this case and kind of try to jog their memories of anything from around that time frame. And I went over like just the locations of everything, and they both immediately knew everything. I brought up one location and my mom's like, oh yeah, this store was there, this was there, that was there. And like they truly, this was their stomping grounds as kids. Which is one reason I'm absolutely blown away that they have never heard of this.
Yeah.
And they were 16 when this happened. They were 1 year younger.
Yeah, I was going to say really close in age.
Yeah, my dad graduated high school in 81 and my mom graduated in 82. And both Susan and Eyvonne would have graduated in 80. So they're very, very close in age. This also happened in areas that I'm incredibly familiar with. I lived in the suburbs before moving to Wisconsin. And then once I made the decision to move back to Illinois after college, I lived with my grandmother for 9 months in the suburbs again as an adult. And I literally drove past exactly where this all happened minimally once a week.
Oh my gosh.
So this is an area that I'm familiar with as well. I just obviously wasn't there in 1979.
Sure.
So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I only found a little bit of information about Susan and Eyvonne's personalities. But I did see a couple interviews with family members, and I did find that older article that gave me just a little bit. Susan's sister, Judy Sanfilippo, told NBC in an interview that Susan was a wonderfully happy kid and that she really loved animals. And she had a dream of working with kids as her career. So I'm not sure if that is necessarily a teacher or some other industry where she would be working with kids, maybe a daycare. But that seemed to be her career path, is something involving children.
I can't believe this. They're so young.
They're so young. And once we get into it, there's a lot of just really bizarre things that we don't know enough details about, that it's even kind of hard to speculate. But I have a couple thoughts that we can kind of talk about with them, just because I'm familiar with the area more so than anything. In the Chicago Tribune article from 1979, Susan's uncle, Donald Ovington, described Susan as a sweet girl and a typical teenager. He said that Susan was always neat and well-dressed, and that she had recently learned to sew and started making some of her own clothes, which is something that made her really proud.
Oh, that's so cool. That's really,
Right.
yeah.
And kind of just reminded me of Katie Gallagher that we just talked about a couple weeks
Yeah,
ago.
exactly. Just this sort of interest in sewing and that it could grow, and it's so sad that, like, she was so proud of the stuff she was starting and didn't get a chance to finish it.
Mm-hmm. He also mentioned that she always kept her word, especially when it came to her schedule.
Mm.
And he said, quote, when she said she'd be home by 5 p.m., when she said she'd be home by 5:15 p.m., she would be home by 5:15. And that's why everyone was concerned. And he is referring to the day that she was murdered and didn't return home as planned.
Mm-hmm. So they immediately knew something was up.
Mm-hmm. This all happened pretty quickly.
Oh.
We have a pretty short timeline for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Eyvonne was best friends with Susan. And their former homeroom teacher, Larry Erickson, said that if you saw one of them, you would inevitably see the other nearby. And he said that they were good kids that just didn't cause trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned that, quote, they were always a help rather than a hindrance in the homeroom.
Mm-hmm.
So it really just seemed like they were just kind-hearted people and
good kids.
wanted to help people more than anything.
Yeah, just good kids.
Mm-hmm. And Yvonne's boyfriend, 22-year-old Larry Olker, said that she was so nice, so lovable, and very pretty. She always cared about church and went every Wednesday night and Sunday.
Oh, wow.
He also mentioned that she loved disco and said, quote, she was always laughing and having a good time.
Uh-huh.
And Larry's older brother, Al, had mentioned that when he was talking to the Chicago Tribune, that Eyvonne was going over to the house that previous Friday night and she made a lasagna for their whole family and that she really loved to cook.
Oh.
And I just think that's so sweet that at 17, she's going and making a lasagna for the family because that's just a very comfortable thing to hang out with your partner's family like that.
Yeah, and just to get that whole meal together for them and everything, that's really sweet.
Yeah, and he also had mentioned that Larry and Eyvonne had talked about getting married in the future. They didn't have anything specific planned, and they weren't engaged yet, but they did have that goal.
Sure. They're pretty young, so they, probably said around,
Exactly.
A few years from now.
She was just entering her senior year of high school, so yeah, they seemingly wanted to wait a bit, so she's minimally out of high school, and that they could get their lives started together independently from their families. And Larry met Eyvonne because he had been best friends since childhood with a man named Joe Mayoris. It's Majoris or Mayoris. I'm not entirely sure. I couldn't find a pronunciation. But Joe was Susan's boyfriend.
Aww.
So it's two best friends dating two best friends.
Yeah, that's so sweet.
Yeah, and Susan and Joe had then introduced Larry and Eyvonne, and obviously they just immediately hit it off.
Yeah. Yeah. They were planning they had in their sights to get married.
Exactly. So let's get into a bit of our timeline. Around 2:30 p.m. on September 5th in 1979, Susan and Eyvonne wanted to go shopping at this little kind of shopping complex mall. It's not like your typical indoor mall, but it just had a lot of stores in one small area. And this was at the corner of Dempster Street and Waukegan Road in Morton Grove.
Wow.
And it's
so
very close.
That's so close.
And Eyvonne told her mom that she and Susan were just going to go shopping for back to school clothes. And her mom said that she should be home by 5 o'clock for dinner, which was their normal schedule. And September 5th was a Wednesday. And it was supposed to be the first day of school for both Susan and Eyvonne at Niles West High School.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a teacher strike, and this actually prevented the school year from starting on time. So they actually just had the day off.
Okay. Okay. And they were getting ready to go in as seniors, both of them, right? Yeah, of course. They were all 17. Mm-hmm.
So at 5 p.m. that night, Eyvonne didn't return home for dinner. They were driving Eyvonne's family's car. So obviously with the expectation of be home for dinner, plus you need to bring the car home.
Yeah.
That was very unusual, and her family was immediately worried.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was saying, Eyvonne was very consistent. She had an actual routine every night. Dinner was exactly at 5 p.m. with her family. And then by 5:30 or 6, depending on what time they finished eating, she would call her boyfriend Larry. And this was clockwork every night.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when Larry didn't receive his nightly phone call from Eyvonne, he called her house around 6:30.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
because
Eyvonne's...
Sorry, I just heard that's a half
sense.
hour. Yeah, about a half hour past when you would normally hear from somebody. I think that's normal that you would say,
exactly.
Okay, now's time to check in.
Mm-hmm. And Eyvonne's mom informed him that she hadn't come home yet. Oof. And in that Chicago Tribune article, Larry is quoted saying that was strange and it wasn't like her, so I called Joe. And Joe's obviously referring to Susan's boyfriend, his best friend. Mm-hmm. Larry didn't get a hold of Joe right away, but eventually by 8 p.m., he was able to get a hold of him on the phone. And Joe had mentioned that he had seen Eyvonne's car in a parking lot at Parking Mini Golf around 6 p.m. And that is all within this same area of this shopping center. Mm-hmm. So logically, it would make sense that her car could be in that parking lot because it's literally right there.
Right. So it may have never moved from where she parked it.
Exactly. And we're not entirely sure of that, but it's a logical assumption that it could not. There's a possibility it didn't move. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this immediately seemed weird to both of the men. Parking didn't open until 7 p.m. Mm-hmm. So that just seemed weird that they would potentially park there, not necessarily realizing that they went shopping. Mm-hmm. And so immediately Larry told Joe that he was on his way over to Joe's house so that they could kind of figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. And once there, Joe and Larry called their siblings and a couple of friends to form a search party.
Oh, that's so nice. That's great.
To me, it really seems like they really cared about these two girls.
Oh, yeah.
That they really did love them and they wanted to make sure that they were fine.
Right, right.
They decided to start in St. Paul Woods, which is a forest preserve that is just less than half a mile from where Susan and Eyvonne were going to go shopping that day. Mm-hmm. It's very, very close.
Mm-hmm. Oh, forest preserves too. Those scare me whenever they come up in these cases.
Literally, the next line in my script is St. Paul Woods does not have the best reputation. Oh. It is very well known as a teenager hangout where drugs are often used and where drugs are often sold out in the open. Mm-hmm. And a park ranger that was quoted in that Chicago Tribune article, who asked to stay anonymous, said that the rangers just couldn't control the area and that his management didn't really see this as a problem.
Wow.
And the ranger says that he wanted the ability to patrol the area on horseback or on a motorcycle to cover more ground. Mm-hmm. But they wouldn't let him.
Oh no. Like, that's one thing that we've learned is that more than anything, you've got to listen to your staff when they say, this is bad area, we got to pick it up, you know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if this park ranger had that ability, there is the possibility that this would have never happened.
Mm-hmm.
So Larry and his brother, and then Joe and his 2 brothers, along with 2 friends, so 7 people total, decided to form this search party, and they split into 2 groups to go search the St. Paul woods. And this was around 9 p.m., maybe a little bit after. Larry said he started to walk towards the river, which is, this section of St. Paul woods is fairly narrow along Dempster. I'd say it's a couple blocks, and then it gets wider as you kind of go north into the preserve. But there's a small river that kind of crosses right through there at Dempster.
Okay.
So in this narrow patch. And he said that he saw a pool of blood and a hairbrush.
Oh. Wow, fast.
But
too.
that's
It
kind of
seems
very fast. And this is about 9:30 that they saw this. So within half an hour or less, they found this. And they continued to walk down the trail a little further, and his friend Garrett Klein was in front of him, and he nearly tripped over Yvonne's body in the dark.
Oh God.
And then about 25 feet away was Susan's body. The search party immediately ran to call the cops after discovering the bodies. And in current time, it's kind of hard to fully comprehend the idea of traveling to a phone.
Right.
But I can't imagine finding them and then having to run to your car and then run home or run to a store that will let you use their phone or whatever to call the police. Like, that has to feel like such a long period of time trying to get the help that you need.
Yeah. Like, it's just prohibitive, time frame. Like, but there's nothing they could have done.
No, there isn't. But there's also the question, like, do you leave somebody behind with them? Or do you all go? Like, is there still a risk that whoever did this is still around?
Right.
Like, that has to be such a terrifying situation to be in.
Oh, yeah. Like, do you leave somebody in the woods going on 10 p.m. at night? Yeah.
Where clearly 2 women were just murdered.
Right, violence. Yeah, there was violence in the area.
And according to the Chicago Tribune, both girls were found, quote, partly clad, and their bodies were hidden nearly fully from view. You could see them a little bit, but they were under some bushes just off of the trail. And I couldn't find what partly clad very specifically meant, but it's understandably implying that some of their clothes were removed. I just don't know what and how much.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of a little vague, but maybe they're holding that back, like what they found.
Yes, I do think there's a lot of things that are being held back. This article came out 2 days after the murders, and this article by far had the most information of anything else I read. So it feels like some information came out for this one, but everything else after that was held back. Each girl had multiple gunshot wounds. And then about 50 feet away, there was the clearing, which is where the pool of blood and the hairbrush were that the search party initially saw. Both Susan and Yvonne's bodies had wounds that were believed to be caused by dragging their bodies into the brush where they were found. So it's believed that they were shot where that pool of blood was and then dragged.
It makes sense. And I mean, one of the men you even mentioned almost tripped over Eyvonne.
And they said that in the Tribune article, they said that they had 2 flashlights, which is why I think they split off into 2 parties.
Mm-hmm.
And so imagine 3 to 4 people walking around in the woods with only 1 flashlight.
Yeah, yeah.
Understandably, I understand how that happened and how he got that close to her without seeing her in the dark.
Right, right. And also that makes sense as to why you might not want to leave somebody behind if you only have
Exactly.
2 flashlights. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they did leave some behind. It's just that's kind of one of the first thoughts that came into my head when I was reading this, of just imagining myself in that situation. I don't know what I would do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a heavy decision. It's a big decision.
Oh, it's a huge decision. And I hope to never be in that situation. But we also have the added benefit nowadays of cell phones where you don't necessarily
Exactly.
have to leave and you could immediately contact police. An autopsy was conducted on September 6th, and it noted that both girls suffered gunshot wounds to the head with a large caliber gun.
Oof.
There was no additional specifics. I have no clue what type of gun, other than it being large caliber.
Yeah. Oof.
Susan had also been shot in the chest and the leg, and Eyvonne had been shot in the arm as well as the head.
Oh, wow.
And the medical examiner believes that the murder happened around 3 p.m., which is only half an hour after they arrived at the mall to go shopping.
Yeah, that's quick.
And I couldn't find any details on if the girls were sexually assaulted, but current articles do say there is DNA. So that could be from sexual assault, that could be from moving the bodies. It really makes me wonder with the partly clad comment.
Yeah. Yeah. It also makes me wonder if maybe, I don't know, it sounds like they were just executed, but I wonder if one of them maybe had it under her fingernails.
Yeah,
That
I
seems
really don't
less
know.
likely. That seems less likely.
And I don't
'cause-
know with the shots to the head, like as you mentioned, execution, I don't know if they were able to determine if it was like that specific. I did find a very interesting theory, and I didn't dive into it much. It was on like a true crime message board comparing the burger shop murders to the murders of Susan and Eyvonne, because the burger shop murders happened about 3 hours away from Morton Grove.
Wow.
And that they do have some similarities. The victims in the burger shop murders were taken into the woods and murdered execution style. So that was kind of the end of the theory that I read, just saying like these are oddly similar and they're fairly close geographically, but there's no additional evidence to go along with that. So some bizarre things happened after the murders. Upside down crosses were painted on Eyvonne's parents' garage, driveway, and on her father's car.
What?
And this is supposedly about, I think it was about 7 months after their murders, which was
wow.
Eyvonne's 18th birthday.
Whoa.
So very, very odd.
That is odd. That is bizarre. And I wonder if connected or unconnected, you know?
Yeah, I personally have a theory. I'll get to that in just a moment. But another odd thing that happened was Eyvonne's sister, Sharon Peterson. She had moved to Texas very shortly before the murder. And just about a month after the murder in Texas, she received a phone call. And the caller said, quote, "Hey, how are you? Do you know who this is? It's me, your sister."
Whoa. And you said this is 7 months?
This is about a month after the murder.
Oh, okay.
The upside down crosses was about 7 months. The phone call
Okay.
was about 1 month.
Okay. Wow.
And Sharon says that she just froze in this moment and hung up the phone without saying anything to the caller,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't blame her. That has to be absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's scary.
And what I'll say about both of these instances is we have very little information on them. But
Mm-hmm.
I personally believe they're likely unrelated to the murders.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought on this is the beginning of the rise of satanic panic in the 80s.
Mm.
Because
So
the upside down
maybe,
crosses would have been in 1980.
yeah, yeah. So it just could be some completely screwed up, unhinged, classmate of hers who's like, hey, we know that she would have been 18. Maybe we go over
Mm-hmm.
there and vandalize it, which is like horrible, but also
It's
could happen.
absolutely awful.
Yeah,
I asked my
yeah.
mom I brought this up to her. I didn't specifically say satanic panic, at least not yet. And her immediate response was she felt like this also could have been satanic panic because she's just
Mm-hmm.
like that's all everyone talked about at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think based on my first thought and then my mom's first thought being in this area at this time frame that there's a good possibility it's unrelated. It's a very cruel prank,
Mm-hmm.
but not related to the murders.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we know very little about the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And recently, a former classmate of Susan and Eyvonne filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the
Oh,
case file,
okay.
but the request was denied. And the response to the request was that it would be detrimental to the investigation to release it.
Okay. So they might have something they're sitting on that they just don't want to reveal.
I don't know. We'll see. I have a little bit of information, but I will say I do believe that the former classmate who filed the Freedom of Information Act request is the same classmate who increased the reward money. I could be
Oh.
wrong. I am speculating on this.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know the reward money that I mentioned earlier that bumped up from $1,000 to $10,000 within this last week was provided by a former classmate.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm making the assumption that they're probably the same people, but they might not be. I
Mm-hmm.
honestly don't know. I do know the donor wants to remain anonymous.
Okay.
So I didn't dive into researching about this Freedom of Information Act request or anything like that because that's
Mm-hmm.
not my business. If they want to remain anonymous,
Right.
please do. They're doing a
Right.
good thing
Right.
regardless.
Right.
But in some recent articles, there was the mention that this investigation kind of had a re-investigation in 2020. They're
Mm-hmm.
re-interviewing witnesses, people who were in Susan and Eyvonne's lives at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so far, they say they have interviewed 45 people
Wow.
and that they plan to interview 62 more in the, quote, near future.
Wow. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. And for
Mm-hmm.
interviewing 45 in the last 3 years, it
Mm-hmm.
concerns me how long it might take to interview the 62 more.
Right. Right.
And unfortunately, the girls' families are incredibly frustrated over
Mm-hmm.
this situation with the investigators.
Yeah.
And really, they're unsure of what happened in this investigation prior to 2020. They
Hmm.
haven't received the communication that they've been asking for.
Wow.
And that was promised to them by investigators.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been 4 different sets of detectives working on this case since 1979, and there still
Wow.
seems to be no movement.
Wow. I can't believe they didn't get that communication from investigators back when this happened or any updates or anything like that.
Yeah, they said in quite a few different articles within this last week or so that they were promised updates and just open
Mm-hmm.
communication, and they felt like they haven't received that at all
Yeah.
in the last 44 years.
Oh, that's awful.
And with this knowledge of having interviewed 45 people and then having another 62 that they want to interview, their
Mm-hmm.
siblings set up a meeting with investigators, and they said, we want to see this list of 62 people. Maybe we can give some insight
Mm-hmm.
into potentially who to focus on or anyone to potentially add to the list, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly before this meeting, I'm assuming a couple of days, I didn't see that specifically recorded in any of the articles,
Mm-hmm.
but one of their sisters texted one of the detectives saying like, hey, just please a reminder, bring this list to our meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, she was informed that they will no longer be sharing the list with them.
What? Why?
Don't know why.
Yeah.
And the meeting was eventually canceled, so I don't believe it's happened. It could
Oh
have. This was an
man.
article that was last week. I believe it was supposed to happen last week, Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that clearly upset them.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be upset too.
But now let's get into a little bit of our theories and speculation, because unfortunately those are all of the facts we don't have anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I did see in an article from 2011 that mentioned both Joe and Larry were questioned and cleared by police,
Okay.
which is that's natural. Like, obviously, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
question the boyfriends.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But there are definitely some people, specifically on Reddit, that really have a lot of questions for their alibis. We don't know what their alibis are,
Oh, okay.
um, but they most specifically question Joe.
Hmm.
And some
Okay.
people wonder what Joe was doing to see the car at Parking Mini Golf at 6 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
and why he didn't answer Larry's phone calls until 8 p.m.
Interesting. Okay.
I can kind of understand the speculation. Like, these are questions to ask, and these,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, are likely questions investigators asked.
Oh
I think these are
yeah.
pretty basic,
Oh
understandable
yeah.
questions.
And if we, have like the vague idea that they've been cleared, then investigators probably went over that question first, like,
Exactly. That's
how
my
did you
thought.
see this car? Yeah, how did you see this car? And I do see a little bit of that window why it might be like a little bit longer like that because the phones weren't nearly as accessible.
Yeah, what if he just wasn't home? What if he was out to
Yeah,
dinner or something?
yeah, and he would have had no idea that he was calling because it's the
Yeah.
70s. Like
You didn't have
you
caller
just don't
ID
know.
even at that
No.
point.
Yeah, exactly.
I do know Joe lived in Morton Grove, so he
Mhm.
could have just so easily been driving down Dempster and
Mhm.
seen the car when he drove by. Like, that to
Right.
me
Right.
doesn't seem weird. But again, I
Right.
understand where these questions are coming from because we don't know why they were cleared. We don't know what their
Mhm.
alibis were.
Mhm. And I mean, yeah, it would have been so easy to just recognize, like, oh yeah, that's my girlfriend's car or my girlfriend's friend's car. The like, I recognize it, and it's sort of in the air. Who knows? Maybe he knew they were going shopping, and
Yeah,
he just decided to take a spin past and say, "Hey, their car is still there."
yeah. So, like, I get where the questions are coming from, but I think it's a pretty um, big leap to his involvement in their murders.
Yeah, I agree. Because, I mean, we know that he immediately turned out and brought brothers to the search party.
Exactly. And other people are speculating about Larry's gut feeling to search the woods right away. Because that's the first place they went with their search party.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I understand, again, how this could be odd. But on the Reddit thread, someone posted a comment. And obviously, this is Reddit. Take it with a grain of salt. It could be someone making everything up. So, but I believe them because of other things I've read. But they said that they were actually friends with Susan and Eyvonne. And that they would often hang out with them in St. John's Woods. And this was a very popular place for teenagers to smoke and drink. Which matches what that ranger was saying in the Chicago Tribune article. And that I also read this same general thing in a lot of other articles as well, that this was a really popular, like, teenage hangout for smoking pot and drinking.
Right. Because, like, I mean, they can be good kids and then drink and smoke pot at the local spot. Like, both those things can be true. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
so it wouldn't surprise me. And I don't know if as you go on you might talk a little bit more about this, but I think Larry's assumption is exactly the same assumption a lot of us would have made. Like, okay, well, we're at a shopping... Like, where are we going to search first? The shopping center? No, it was probably well lit and well accessible, you know? Like, let's go check the woods. Like, that, I understand.
Well, I have a couple theories on this as well. And I think what you're saying is exactly right. And I think based on a couple little things that I read and putting those pieces together, that this might not have been an uncommon thing for them potentially to park over there and go down to the woods.
Yeah.
Because
yeah, sure.
In that Chicago Tribune article, Larry briefly mentions that Joe and Susan would go there to take pictures, like in that area specifically. So obviously they're aware of it.
Yeah.
And I think that if this Reddit poster is telling the truth, in combination with what was published in the Chicago Tribune with an interview with Larry in 1979, 2 days after the murder, I really believe that this could have really just been a hangout, and maybe they never wanted to go shopping, and that's what they told their families so they could go smoke and drink that afternoon.
I was going to say, that kind of sounds like what could have happened.
And that's pure speculation, but
exactly.
It makes a lot of sense to me based on all these little tiny pieces I have seen in multiple places.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
And another big theory that was brought up is in the Chicago Tribune. They're the ones who kind of pieced this together. Between 1976 and 1979, 5 young women and teenagers were murdered in the northern suburbs of Chicago.
Wow.
These were all separate incidents, but it's an interesting theory.
Yeah,
I tried to dive into this a little bit, but I discovered that eventually these murders were solved.
Oh, okay.
Some of them were actually even solved before Susan and Eyvonne's murders, so that was kind of interesting to me that the Tribune brought this up. But they were all completely separate cases from each other.
Oh, wow.
And most of those murders were stabbings, not shootings.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
I just found it interesting that the Tribune did point this out, that I wanted to mention it, but I don't think they're related. There is also a little bit of speculation about an incident that happened just about a month prior to their murders. A teenage girl was raped at knife point in St. John's Woods.
Oh, wow.
Right in that same area.
Wow.
This girl was able to escape and she survived.
Oh, thank
But
God.
I do kind of wonder if this has the potential of being an escalation from a knife to a gun.
I was
If he
gonna
wasn't
say,
successful the first time with a knife, bring something more
yeah,
deadly. I don't
yeah.
know.
And it's interesting that this poor teenage girl was raped, and then they mentioned that the bodies were partly clad. You know?
Exactly. And there's some theories on that on Reddit as well, that
Mm-hmm.
maybe, because I go into it just a little bit later into the script here, but 5 shots from a large caliber
Yeah.
gun is not going to be quiet.
No, that's true. You're right about that.
And this is a metropolitan area. Like, yes, it is in a forest preserve, but they're very, very close to a
Mm-hmm.
main, very busy road.
Right. I was gonna say, it sounds like they were
So,
really, really right
yeah.
there.
And then also, one other thing that I haven't seen like written anywhere in any of the articles, but I would just like to point out, because I'm really familiar with this area, is there's train tracks pretty close to there, like right on the edge of St. John's Woods. There's train tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So if this person had the ability to time it correctly, a train could
Oh,
potentially
yeah.
cover up the noise.
Cover the
I feel like
sound
that's
of the
kind of a
shots.
long shot. I don't really
But
I don't
it
really know.
also, it might not be. I mean, if the person who murdered them was familiar with the area as well, and then it wouldn't be
Hmm.
odd, maybe some people, if they heard these shots, to chalk it up to a train.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, oh, maybe a train just went by and I didn't hear it, but I heard the rattling of the tracks. And that, was the mistake made there, instead of thinking, oh, that's out of the ordinary, I should go check.
Right. And one thing I will say with that as well is I don't know if those train tracks have ever changed. They've
Mm-hmm.
been in that location in all of my memory.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they were different in 1979. I don't have that confirmation. I don't feel like they were, based on them being there for so long. I remember into the early 90s them being there, so it's
Mm-hmm.
not terribly, terribly long after.
Mm-hmm. Not terribly long, no.
But another kind of bizarre thing that kind of then jumps more so into kind of the questions more than the speculation is what we were kind of mentioning earlier, is did they actually go shopping?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing investigators have clearly said was that their purses were in their car.
Oh, okay.
And that again leads me to believe maybe they never had the intention to go shopping in the first place. Because if their
Yeah, I was
purses are
gonna
in the
say.
car, they can't buy anything
Yeah.
if their wallets are in their purses.
Right, which is logical. Their wallets were probably in their purses.
Yeah, I never saw a
So,
mention of like wallets or keys specifically,
mm-hmm.
but they did very clearly say that the purses were left in the cars, in the car.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So that gives me more of that feeling that, yeah, they probably wanted to go like smoke a joint or have a beer
Yeah, have a beer. Yeah,
on
yeah.
potentially the last day of summer. I don't know when the strike ended, but
Sure, yeah,
I
potentially.
can
Yeah,
understand
last
that.
day. Yeah, last day of summer. Let's head on over to St. John's Woods, and that's a good spot. And then maybe they were even there for a little bit when this person showed up, and they said to each other, like, oh, it's a really well-known area, don't worry about that guy, or whoever that person is.
Or like, what if they went there to go buy some weed? It was
Yeah.
a well-known area of where you could openly buy drugs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That Reddit poster, they did go on to say some other things that I don't have the ability to verify because I don't know their name. But they said that they'd hung out in those woods before and that they had seen people kind of like creeping on the perimeter. They even made a mention that they once were coerced into a van.
Oh, wow.
I don't know anything else. And again, it's Reddit. Take it for what you will, with a grain of salt. But just what this person said, I really don't know. But it does kind of fit the narrative of what the ranger said.
It does. It does. It tracks.
But yeah, just the last thing I kind of had in my script here was the gunshots and the train. And this all kind of reminds me of Delphi.
Yeah.
And
especially with the train tracks there.
Well, not even just with the train tracks, but like in the woods, murdering two teenagers and moving their bodies, which I don't believe they did that in Delphi. There's a lot of speculation on if he posed them or not, but the actual like dragging and movement, because remember the pool of blood was 50 feet away.
Yeah.
And
that's a drag that you have.
It's a drag, but it's also the distance between Eyvonne and Susan was 25 feet. So you can assume, I'm assuming Susan was dragged first because she was further, 75 feet. And then Eyvonne was dragged second, 50 feet. That's a good distance.
Yeah.
You're probably going to get blood on you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And you're going to be walking out of these woods in the middle of the afternoon with blood on you.
Yeah, because they said it happened at likely 3:00 p.m. So even if it took him like an hour to move all of them, it's still pretty well traveled. Like at 4 p.m., you would have to emerge from the brush covered in blood.
Yeah, which is weird. And then kind of just the one last thing I really have in this, because again, like we just don't have much, is some conversation on Reddit about where the gunshot wounds are on their bodies. Obviously, they both were shot in the head. But then there's the gunshot to the arm on Eyvonne, and then the gunshot to Susan's leg and her chest. And the speculation with this is maybe Susan was shot in the leg to prevent her from running.
Yeah, maybe. But
honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense if he, shot Eyvonne in front of her, that she maybe ran, and he shot her leg so she wouldn't keep running. Maybe he shot her next in the chest, trying to go for her head. And then that's where it ended up, Yeah,
it's just very weird. And I have a lot of questions.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm very disappointed in the articles having no details of this case. And talking about reward money and wanting to get public's involvement to bring information forward, but you're not giving the basic information to let the public know what to even look for to jog their memories.
Right. And then that makes me question, I think you have a good question here in the script. Just a little bit about the hairbrush.
I completely skipped that.
Yeah,
so the hairbrush, which is very interesting to me, because we don't know if it belonged to one of them. And as Larry had mentioned in that Tribune article, Joe and Susan would go take photos in this area. And what if Susan and Eyvonne wanted to go take pictures, and they brought a hairbrush with to kind of spruce up before the photos.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's my thought. I don't really know, but it's
Mm-hmm.
weird that was very specifically called out in the Tribune
Right.
article that a hairbrush was found.
Right. So
So I don't
interesting.
know. I think there's a good
Mm-hmm.
likelihood that they were not coerced into the woods.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I mean, I don't know, and I'm speculating, but I feel like they probably were not coerced down there. I feel like it makes more sense if that they went down there themselves, and then, like I said, they were maybe just sitting there having a beer and smoking a joint, and said, don't worry about that guy who's kind of like prowling the perimeter. Guys always do that. And
yeah.
then he
Well,
came
just
back,
also,
maybe.
yeah. You don't even know how long he could have been there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also just knowing the area. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, it's just shy of half a mile. I think when I looked it up from the intersection of Dempster and Waukegan, I think it was 0.4 miles to St. John's Wood.
Okay. So
So
yeah.
it's not a long walk by any means, but it's a long walk if you're being coerced on
Mm-hmm.
a very
Yeah.
busy road.
Yeah. And if you're being forced along,
Yeah, that makes me think they weren't forced to do that walk along that road.
yeah,
It just seems
because
so
it's so
risky.
busy. Yeah, and it's well populated.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was my only other thought and question. I have a lot of thoughts and questions, but yeah, it seems odd that that hairbrush made it all the way down there, and they were so specific about it.
Yeah, and as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, my parents have never heard of this case. It was not
Mm-hmm.
talked about in their homes. It was not talked about in their schools.
Wow.
They were as blown away as I was when I first heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to my mom probably 6 or 7 hours on the phone this weekend. We spent a lot of time
Yeah.
talking about this case. And
Yeah.
we're baffled. We are amazed by the lack of reporting,
Yeah.
both back in 1979 and today. And
Right.
I would love to see this solved. And as I mentioned, I know a
Yeah.
lot of you are listening in the suburbs, right in that area. A lot of you are very close to this age range. I would love to
Mm-hmm.
hear from you if you remember anything, or if you
Yeah.
just knew them and knew their personalities. I would love to be able to do a follow up on this and be able
Yeah.
to give you more than a couple sentences about who they were.
Mm-hmm. I would love to see another interview, on the subject of the reward money being raised. Like another interview with maybe Larry or whoever had spoken before.
Yeah, I know it's been their siblings who have been
Okay.
kind of openly talking about it.
Okay.
And I certainly plan on following up with this and keeping
Mm-hmm.
my eye out because that meeting was canceled, but I'm hoping
Yeah.
it's going to be rescheduled and more information will come out after they talk with
Yeah.
the families. So
Yep.
I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on this because I would
Mm-hmm.
love to see this solved. And I find this pretty upsetting that it's not more well known, even to the
Yeah.
locals.
Yeah. To any of us, I haven't heard about this, and this is so close.
It's so
It's so
incredibly
close.
close. And like I said, I my one of my best friends, right when I moved to Chicago or to the suburbs, when I lived with my grandmother, to see him, I saw him minimally once a week. Would drive
Mm-hmm.
directly past this. I know this area
Wow.
so well. My dad
Wow.
literally grew up 3 miles away from here,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sad to me that they never heard about this.
Yeah.
But that is all that we have. So thank you for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? You can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod or email us at Have You Heard About This Case at gmail.com. And we would also love it if you had the ability to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And thank you so much. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.